Adventure, adversity, resilience, and triumph. The story of Japanese in America has been compelling and often inspiring. More than 100 years ago, the first Issei journeyed to Hawaii and the West Coast to work the fields and fishing fleets and establish businesses, lives, and families in the face of discrimination and anti-Asian legislation. During World War II, the United States government confined families in concentration camps, even as their Nisei children were called to serve in the U.S. military. After the war's end, a fragmented community slowly rebuilt itself and emerged to eventually regain a prominent place in American life. But that history is far from complete. There are still many surprising stories of men and women whose inner strength, resourcefulness, and spirit of adventure have not been told. World War II profoundly affected these individuals, but each in a very different and unexpected way. These stories continue to enrich our awareness of the diversity and complexity of the Japanese experience in America. Thousands of miles across the continent, Sumi and Yuri, two sisters, were born to Issei parents who met, married, and began their family in Palm Beach County, Florida. Their grandfather, H.T. Kamiya, moved to Florida in 1905 and helped establish Yamato colony.
They felt that they were going to have rich farmlands and bring wealth into the community.
The colony was intended to be a pineapple plantation.
Pineapples didn't grow there, they grew in Cuba. So they had to figure out something else to grow there. So they grew vegetables. And then they had the railroad, so they put the thing from that dock there, and they loaded the vegetables on, and they sent them to Miami, and they made a whole bunch of money.
Papa married Yetsu Kamiya and had 4 children, including Masa Kamiya.
None of my mother's family were expected to marry Japanese because, how many Japanese do you find in that Yamato colony? But, eventually you run out of matches.
In 1930, Harry Fukushima traveled across America from California to Florida.
He had a gift shop, and he went to see the Japanese people that were in Florida. And he met Mama. And he fell in love with Mama.
She never spoke any Japanese at all. Therefore, we didn't have any kind of Japanese background till we went to camp. My childhood memories were, I saw this great big house. I could see the coconut trees or the palm trees and the orange and grapefruit trees in the backyard. My father could cook Italian, Chinese, Japanese, and my mother, she did a lot of Southern cooking. That's where we got our black-eyed peas and rice. So I always have black-eyed peas on New Year's Eve, and I have mochi for my Japanese for good luck.
By 1941, the Fukushima family had moved to Los Angeles. On December 7, the Japanese military bombed Pearl Harbor.
The war started, and I didn't know how it was going to affect us because I was so young. You don't think about war and where you're going to live and things like that.
Mama got a refrigerator, and when we had to leave for camp, she says she was going to take the refrigerator. She's not going to leave her refrigerator. And so my father had to get rid of it while she was at work, because she used to work in a sewing factory. And when she came home and she saw that space there, she cried. I never saw my mother cry.
Over 120,000 Japanese Americans were ordered to evacuate the west coast of the United States.
At the police station, we had to check in all of our cameras and radios. And Mama would not give up she had a little radio like that, and so she smuggled that into camp.
The Fukushima family was sent to live at the Manzanar concentration camp, along with 11,000 other people.
Nobody was going to escape. In Manzanar, there's no place to go. It was desert or mountains, and at that time, the mountains were not friendly. Papa was a real adventuresome guy, and then when he came from Florida to visit us right when the war broke out, and they wanted him to go back to Florida where he didn't have to be evacuated, but he chose to go to camp with us. In Manzanar, you had the restroom and the shower was there, but it was one big room, and they had the different showers coming out of the wall, and there's no privacy. So everybody used to have a towel and hang that in front of them when they took showers. Yeah, they had school in Manzanar. Very good schools, actually, because they had volunteer white people that came in. A lot of them were Quakers. Every Saturday night, we used to listen to the hip parade. They had the 10 top tunes of the week. And
seems like there were half a dozen or so people that came to listen.
They came over to our barrack to listen to that. The Jugs, just us girls, that was our club. We had that in camp, and we came out and had it. The LA guys had a gang, Burbank people had a gang, and San Pedro had a gang. San Pedro was probably the toughest. When there was a dance, everybody was there, and after the dance, and there would be fighting, usually over girls. You dance with this girl, and she's a San Pedro girl, and you shouldn't have danced with her, and stuff like that, just like in the movies.
3 years later, the war ended.
August the 16th, they told us that everybody had to get out then, and we could come back to the West Coast then.
The Fukushima family moved to the Boyle Heights neighborhood of Los Angeles.
I would not trade the camp experience for anything. I wouldn't want to do it again, but I'm glad I had that experience.
My name is Terry Grimacy Janzen, and I was born in Tokyo, July 15, 1930. My grandmother and grandfather came to Japan in the 1890s to bring electricity and generators to Tokyo under Thomas Edison. My father spoke Japanese fluently. In fact, when I started school, I was 6 years old. It was the international school, and there was about 5 or 6 kids in each class. At that time, I was learning Japanese, how to read. I was fluent in Japanese. I was not fluent in American or English. I remember saying, I could speak English, blah, 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 you know. When everybody started leaving, all of my friends went to these different countries. But I was always the American kid, so that's why it was kind of a shock during the war. All of a sudden, I'm the chap, you know, and not in a nice way.
Due to growing tensions in U.S.-Japan relations, Terry's family moved from Japan to the San Bernardino Valley in 1938. Following the attack on Pearl Harbor, Terry's father joined the Army, while the rest of the family was sent to Poston Camp.
When we got to Poston, it was hot. It was dusty. I am in awe that my parents packed what they did for us kids. My mother had a really rough time in camp because she was used to servants. I ended up more or less doing everything. Mother wouldn't even go out to eat. She was just depressed. So I would get her meals and bring it up. The kind of looked down that Mother wasn't doing her job. I must have shouldered the responsibility. I was 11 and I turned 12 in camp, so. One time that there was a rumor that the Indians were coming to look at the Japanese. And I could see both expressions because they were both at this barbed wire thing, and they looked at each other. The look of astonishment on each other's, they looked just like the Japanese. Everything. Here were stereotyped people, two groups, and hey, they could be brothers and sisters. When we got out, 2 FBI agents came, and they told me that I was to forget my Japanese, that if I didn't, I would go right back to Poston. Somehow that scared me enough that a week later I was trying to, and all of a sudden I found out I couldn't remember Japanese words. I still can't remember Japanese names. I've tried to learn Japanese, but my mind won't retain it. I didn't think I was bothered by the internment, really. I didn't even think about it. This has been about 30 years ago. They had a movie on the internment, and it was just a photographer who went in and took pictures. The people that he took pictures of, they looked at him as a white person with that look that I got. And I saw all these faces looking at him like they looked at me. And I just started sobbing. Those eyes, I keep seeing those eyes. The men are more forgiving, but the women, they're not as forward to tell you what they feel, and they hurt. I can handle what's happened. I've turned it into a positive from a negative, and that's the way I am.
私の名前は天野浜子、結婚前ね、天野浜子。生まれた年は1925 August 30th。横浜で生まれたから浜子なんです。
At age 7, Hamako's father took her to Panama, where he had several businesses, returning her to Japan when she was in the 3rd grade. Hamako's father remained in Panama, but his frequent travels and business ventures drew suspicion in the days before World War II. On December 7, 1941, after Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor, he was arrested. Detained in internment camps in Panama and the U.S. for 6 months, charged with no crime, he finally returned to Japan in a prisoner exchange.
戦時中、私監視隊っていうところで働いていたんです。テクニカルスクールにちょっと行って、それからすぐ放送局に働きに行ったんです。
I was drafted in March of 1941. Colonel Rasmussen, who organized the MISLS, was looking for people that could take shorthand and type, and so I was sent to the Presidio of San Francisco. We were recruiting Niseis from all over the California area. One day, I told the colonel I was tired of the office work. Could I go out in the field and learn Japanese? Because I associated with the Nisei kids that were drafted. I was sent to Radio Tokyo, where I was put in censorship. I wanted to see the great Daibutsu in Kamakura.
鎌倉から出る市電に乗るために待ってたんです。ところが待てど暮らせどそれが来ないんですよね。そのうちに彼は私の後ろに立ってたんですね。
She had just come from having her eye operated on. She had a patch on it, and she looked kind of weird, but I was eager to use my Japanese language, so I spoke up to her anyway.
Hamako agreed to meet again to view the sakura blossoms.
I came all the way from Kamakura, and I went to the meeting place, and no Hamako, she didn't show up. So I got real mad to be stood off by a Japanese girl.
She had written him a letter explaining her absence, but he never received it.
The letter was intercepted. The army would not allow any correspondence between officers and enemy people. So she showed me the letter, and so I couldn't get mad then. After I arrived in Japan the second time, I went to her father's home. The father came to the door. He's a big, tall, fine-looking, serious-looking, scary Japanese man. I said, "Sir, I have come back from California for your permission to marry your daughter." Well, his expression changed right away.
I always thought mixing marriage isn't good things because I see too many sad cases. And I thought they should keep blood pure. However, my father married to the half Japanese lady, and he was very happy.
In 1948, we were married at a little Methodist church on the Ginza. At that time, there were no Orientals allowed in America. So my father went to an alderman, greased his palm for his connections in Washington.
In 1950, President Harry S. Truman signed H.R. 6271, a bill that allowed Mrs. Harry Schneider to enter the U.S.
I was kind of scared because that was very dangerous situation right after war. You know, that American people and Japanese girl, his family was excellent. None of them ever criticized our marriage. In fact, his father told me right away, if anything happened between you and him, I'm always your side. Don't forget.
He meant it.
That was something.
My father was born in Fukuoka in Japan, and my mother was born in Hawthorne.
Iris's father owned several grocery stores in Oxnard, California.
There was restrictions in Oxnard about where non-whites could live, and I didn't know that there was a restriction, but it was a very nice house. We were there in Oxnard until the war started. The FBI or whatever came to get my father because he was an alien. And my mother is this very soft-spoken, typical Japanese woman she was terrified.
Iris's father was taken to Tuna Camp Detention Facility.
He had to sit in a room with all these men around him, and they asked him all these questions about, being a spy or whatever. And he just laughed at them because it was so foreign. The people who weren't citizens were taken to this camp. And I don't know how long he was there, I don't know, maybe 6 months or something, but he was able to leave Tahunga and come to Hilo, where the rest of us had gone to. My father was the manager of the store, and he said that there was so much stealing and everything, it was just terrible, so he decided to leave.
The family moved to Colorado for the duration of the war.
You had a choice of leaving the West Coast or going to camp. So we left camp, and my father bought a farm in Brighton, Colorado.
When World War II ended, the family moved back to Oxnard.
My biggest strength is my hands. I just could do anything. We learned how to knit and crochet and embroider. I didn't like being Japanese. I wanted to look like a white girl who was tall and skinny and blonde. But since I wasn't, I had to do the most of what I had. And then as I got older, I tried to see it as a positive because I heard a lot of good things about Japanese always. I graduated Oxnard High. Then I went to UCLA from there. A lot of us used to go to have coffee together in the annex or the cafeteria. Every time there was a discussion of any kind, Bob was always the one who hit the nail on the head. So, to the point, I was so impressed with his intellect. We got married in 1955. And I found a church with the longest aisle in it. We moved to Boston. Bob went to graduate school at MIT. And that's when I became a designer. A block away was Modern School of Fashion and Design. I looked into it, and I tell you, it's like the sky opened up. Oh, and then I got a job at Priscilla of Boston. I just was kind of a girl Friday, and I used to go in there at 8 o'clock in the morning, and at 9 o'clock I'd clock in. Everybody went home at 5, and I'd be there till 8, just because I loved the place. After Priscilla, I wanted to make all these clothes and do a fashion show, which is what I did. Well, I made about 25 garments, and all my good-looking girlfriends, I trained them to be models. I rented the space, and there were so many people I had to have a second show. Now my father, when he came to that, was very excited. He says, "Oh my goodness, look at all these people."
Iris wanted to open a shop of her own.
When I had decided to rent this place, I went to see him to say, "Oh, Pop, what do you think? Shall I rent this place? It's $125 a month." And so he says, "Well, in 1 year's time, you'll X amount of dollars." "Yeah, I'll go try it." I never did think in terms of season or anything. I just found fabric that I liked, and then I decided what to make afterwards. The best dress I ever designed, because I had the perfect fabric and a perfect figure and the occasion. If you could get all those things in one dress, it's a success.
Iris's dress shop was open for over 30 years in West Hollywood.
The West Hollywood area is where I had my business, and that's where Helen used to come when she first started with me.
She not only makes things, she's very artistic. And as I say, sometimes for instance, in this dress, I bought this in a fabric store. They were, would they call it remainders or something? The hem is blue and it has slits on the side. And she made these for my hair. Did you add this gold inside?
Uh-huh.
You see the detail?
This chrysanthemum was in the obi. I had to cut it out. I'm just a regular dressmaker and I just love fabrics. I have fabric left over, so what I do is I wrap it up and put it in here in case I could use something. This was a piece of fabric that was left over from something, and I made myself a dress, but it's not finished yet. Where's that one?
Oh, that's that hat.
This is the kimono.
Yeah.
See the
The flower, yeah.
This is the last I had of the fabric. I just think I was the luckiest person in the world to be born to my father. He amuses me, he's a terror, and he's so colorful and full of ideas, He just loves this country because he could do anything. There's so many reasons why I feel so lucky, but it's mainly because of my father.
My father was born in Okayama Prefecture, I don't know the town. My mother was born in Kyoto, Japan.
Lloyd was born in Helper, Utah.
I came to California with my mother. My father had already preceded us in 1934. I grew up in a mixed neighborhood, mostly black, Filipino, Mexican. I basically identified myself as Japanese, not Japanese American, just Japanese. During those times, my role model were sports people like Jackie Robinson, Kenny Washington, Joe Louis. And maybe that was some kind of unconscious idea that these blacks were more accepted because they were sports heroes. And maybe that was also the way for me to be an American. I had a home-built scooter that I was riding, and I was going down the hill on the scooter thinking the Japanese had bombed Pearl Harbor, not knowing anything where Pearl Harbor was or anything. But I did know that meant that we were in conflict with Japan.
Lloyd's family was sent to Heart Mountain Relocation Center in Wyoming.
We had limited quarters, but they insisted on everybody staying together. So I remember 12 people being in rooms and things like that, and I had to go to bed first because I was in the middle. My parents made me feel very secure. I never felt anything in terms of the turmoil. They just went along in the so-called shikataganai way. Among Japanese Americans, there were a lot more kids smarter than I was and worked, I guess, as much as I would.
They were released after 3 years.
Ever since I left camp, I was aware. If you were not a white American, you were going to be viewed differently, and especially at this point, if you're Japanese. My uncle found a house in Baltimore. I finished high school there. By that time, I had developed some sports skills, and again, that was kind of a way to be accepted. Even though I was small, I looked athletic, I think, by then. I don't look athletic now, but at that time I did.
He moved to Los Angeles to go to college, but
I couldn't afford out-of-state tuition, so that's when I decided, well, the only option I have maybe is the GI Bill, so I asked to be drafted.
Lloyd was sent to Korea.
During the time in Korea, I began to know that I was an American and not an Asian. That period in my life probably set my career and what I wanted to do. I think that's when I decided that I needed to explain Asia to the Americans. Went back to the States and I applied to Michigan. At that time, I got interested in political science and then combined that with my interest in Asia.
He went to Japan to research his dissertation.
I had a friend named Harry Hartunian who was using Tezuka as a translator. So I met Tezuka. It was much more important to me to marry this young lady than to finish my dissertation.
Lloyd became a professor at California State University, Long Beach.
In the spring of '69, some students, Evelyn Yoshimura and Kerry Furia, came in and asked whether I would be an advisor to their group. They were interested in Asian American studies.
Asian American students were realizing that their communities' histories were not being taught in schools. They felt an urgent need to uncover their pasts in order to define their own identities.
We put together an Asian American course. They were basically student-run, and they were an attempt to get students to speak and be participant in their own education, and at the same time to make sure that there was a community input by bringing people from the community to speak and so forth. If you don't have an academic program that meets the diversity of society and history and so forth, you are really having a kind of limited education. I got involved actually before I retired when the museum was attempting to lay the foundation, but because of illness, I stopped doing that and didn't continue to pursue until after I retired. My own feeling is that the reason I'm still alive now is that the museum gave me something to keep involved with and doing something worthwhile. So I've lived longer than the 10 years I thought I would, and continue to offer my services where I can to the museum.
Thanks to Lloyd's pioneering work, the history of the past will continue to enlighten and inspire future generations. The stories in this program represent only a small sample of the many life history interviews recently collected by the Japanese American National Museum. Preservation and presentation of the first-person voice will remain an integral part of its mission in the years to come.